What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another album review, and we are kicking off a really big weekend here with this particular review. For me, this was the most anticipated album coming out on May 17th, and I am talking about the latest offering from Gatecreeper with Dark Superstition. Came out on May 17th, and this is their first one on Nuclear Blast Records after their first two albums being on Relapse. And, well, I'm a big fan of Gatecreeper. I've enjoyed the two albums that they've done thus far. I thought Deserted was an absolute beast of an album, and in fact, I think I had that pretty high on my 2019 year-end list for the Horseman podcast back in the day. But yeah, this is just awesome, groovy, old-school death metal with hints of thrash and crust and doom kind of thrown into the mix. But yeah, very much just old-school death metal with that HM2 tone, very much in the vein of Entombed and Dismember. But the grooves remind me of Bolt Thrower and Obituary. And you pretty much had all that on their debut album, Sonoran Deprivation, but then their last one, Deserted, pretty much maintained that, but threw in some little hints of melody. Well, this album, I feel like, expands on that melody a little bit. Dare I say, it might not be as heavy as the previous two Gatecreeper albums. It's still really heavy, don't get me wrong, but this has some more nuances going on with more melodic hooks and other elements coming in. And it starts that way with the opening track, Dead Star, where you get this catchy, melodic, and groovy riff. Almost reminded me a lot of Edge of Sanity. Dare I say, a lot of this album made me think of like old Edge of Sanity, like Unorthodox and Spectral Sorrows and maybe even a little Purgatory Afterglow, minus the prog. More of the melodeath side of Edge of Sanity is kind of what I got on a lot of these songs, and pretty much right here with the melodies being more along the lines of Edge of Sanity, but the groove definitely had a lot of Obituary vibes, and dare I say, there's plenty of Obituary moments on this album, even in the vocals, like Chase Mason. I feel like at times he's trying to do his best John Tardy a lot of times on this album, which is really cool, and even in the breakdown on this song, it's very much Obituary-esque, and then you get one of the best solos on the entire album, and there's even a brief thrash beat that pops up on here too. Now, when I'm talking about leads, they're very few and far between, but when they pop up, they're either quite melodic, or they're the big squealy dive bombs, or lead melodies, more or less. And also the production, I gotta mention the production of this album was fantastic. It's still raw and gritty, but with a well-balanced mix. After all, this was Kirk Ballou doing the production again. He's been involved with the production of every Gatecreeper album thus far, and does a fantastic job. But yeah, this opening track really got this album going in a big way. And then you move into the following track, Oblivion, very much more straightforward old school death metal. And dare I say, gets more closer to Swedish death metal. Like, you get nasty tremolos and double bass. It does groove hard, but it gets thrashy and crusty, very much like Entombed and Dismember. But you do get a really cool double time bolt thrower moment. And I gotta mention, this, as well as a later track on the album, Flesh Habit, you get some cool, like, isolated bass moments that's really cool, and yeah, this bass tone is quite gritty. Gonna skip a few tracks. I'm gonna get into the song Superstitious Visions. This is one of a couple of tracks on the album where it starts off more like classic heavy metal. Like in this case, it's more like classic heavy metal harmonized melodies. And I really, really like that. And then it's very catchy, and there's even a cowbell in there. And as the great Christopher Walken once said, I got a fever, and the only prescription is more cowbell. And even a cool lead melody here. But this track in particular has a little bit of a death and roll vibe. Kind of like Entombed, like Wolverine Blues and Uprising, like that kind of death and roll, which those are two fantastic Entombed albums done in that death and roll style, and this song kind of harkens back to that era a little bit for me. Of course, I did rank all of Entombed, and you know how I felt about those two albums. But actually, going back to the previous couple tracks, which were two singles. First, Masterpiece of Chaos. This one is almost like a tale of two halves. Like the first part of the song, very much death doom, like in the vein of Asphyx, and dare I say even early My Dying Bride, because it has a little bit of a dreariness to it and a murkiness to it. But then the second half, it turns in from Death Doom to Morbid Angel. Like, it gets into these tremolos and blasts and dive bombs and grooves that feel 100% like Morbid Angel, and I'm all for it, as you guys probably already know. But then we get into the second half of the album, first to talk about the other singles. Actually, before that, let me go back to the previous track before Masterpiece of Chaos, and it's probably the most different song I have heard Gatecreeper do, The Black Curtain. This song, the HM2 tone is pretty thinned out, and it has a more cleaner tone. It starts off with another like classic metal melody, and it's got groove to it, but it does have a lot of melodic death metal touches. It almost felt like a hybrid of Typo Negative, Amorphous, and Paradise Lost. It's very catchy and kind of almost sounds like it could be something for like extreme metal radio, if that was a possible thing. But it's catchy and it's fun. I don't think it's a bad song. It definitely feels like the one song that stands out like a sore thumb on this entire album, I must admit. But it's a fun, catchy song. It may not be what you would expect Gatecreeper to do, but it works in terms of catchiness. But now into the second half of the album, the single that came out from the second half, Caught in the Treads. This one felt like the most melodic death metal song they've ever written. It's triplet swings and chugs with that melody of Edge of Sanity, but you get some At the Gates moments in here too, and a tasty harmony at the very end of the song. I thought this was, out of the three singles, this one might have been my favorite out of the three. I don't know. They were all pretty cool and different in their own right. Mistaken for Dead, which was the shortest track of the album at under 3 minutes, did feel like kind of like a standard Swedish death metal song. It's good. It's a good song. It's got thrashy, crusty energy to it, and the riffing very much Dismember and Entombed-ish with Dive Bomb, Shred, and a wild lead, but it does feel kind of like, again, standard Swedish death metal, which I do love. But compared to some of the other songs on the album, it doesn't stand out as much, considering it was pretty damn short. Flesh Habit, like I said, starts off with a cool bass line. There's more classic metal nods, melodic progressions, and more of that death and roll vibe coming along. But I gotta say, maybe my favorite song on the album comes right in the middle with A Chilling Aura. This one goes all over the map. Like, the tremolos and blasts that start this track off made me think of the song Before the Creation of Time by Unleashed. It gave me that kind of nostalgia hearing that song. But the the melody and the groove, once again, very much Edge of Sanity, but then it does get into classic Swedish death metal D beats and galloping riffs, even a 3/4 time groove with great harmonies, and then a lead that starts off with big dive bombs into melody. But then we get into the closing track, the longest track of the album at about 6 minutes, Tears Fall from the Sky. This starts off almost funeral doom. Like, it's so depressing sounding, and the melody just makes you feel uncomfortable dread, and then it gets into more straight up death doom with harmonized melodies that felt like Hooded Menace. Double bass comes in with a lead melody, and then at the very end you suddenly get a Motorhead style D beat to close the song and the album, and it was maybe my second favorite track of the album. I don't know, this whole album had a lot of killer songs. But as far as any complaints, other than I would say Mistaken for Dead kind of feeling like the one that felt a bit throwaway, it's good, but it doesn't quite capture the same imagination as the rest of the album. And I will say too, like, they're going for so much on this album. Like, they're trying to break away from the restrictions that I might have felt like they put on themselves by trying to sound like if Bull Thrower and Entombed had a child. While some of it can kind of come off a bit much at times for some people, I actually like the risks that they took, going in the more melodeath direction at times, even some death and roll, some classic metal, but still retaining who they are. So it's kind of a double-edged sword if you really think about it on its or at its deepest level. But overall, I thought this was a great album. It may not be my favorite Gatecreeper album. That would probably still have to go to Deserted. But this is still another great offering from one of the best upcoming, well, not upcoming, but modern death metal titans of the last decade. I am going to give this a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed this one. While it might feel a little bit nuts considering all the different elements they're pulling in on this album in comparison to what they've done in the past, but I think for the most part it really does work. And I just think Gatecreeper's just looking to evolve a little bit, still retain who they are, but add some more colors to their palette almost. But of course, those are just my opinions. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thank you for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.